What are logical fallacies? Logical fallacies are errors in reasoning or flawed arguments that can mislead or deceive. They often appear plausible but lack sound evidence or valid reasoning, undermining the credibility of an argument. These errors can be categorized into various types, such as ad hominem attacks, strawman arguments, and false cause correlations. Impact on critical thinking, communication, and social interactions. The presence of logical fallacies hampers critical thinking by leading individuals away from rational and evidence-based conclusions. In communication, they can create confusion, weaken the persuasiveness of an argument, and hinder the exchange of ideas. In social interactions, reliance on fallacious reasoning can strain relationships, impede collaboration, and contribute to misunderstandings. Benefits of identifying and managing logical fallacies. Learning to identify logical fallacies enhances critical thinking skills, enabling individuals to analyze arguments more effectively and make informed decisions. In communication, recognizing fallacies empowers individuals to construct more compelling and convincing arguments, fostering clearer and more meaningful exchanges. Moreover, the ability to manage logical fallacies promotes healthier social interactions by minimizing misunderstandings, encouraging constructive dialogue, and fostering a more intellectually robust and collaborative environment.
What is the slippery slope fallacy? The slippery slope fallacy occurs when an argument asserts that a relatively small first step will inevitably lead to a chain of related events, culminating in some significant, usually negative, effect, without sufficient evidence to support this inevitability. This fallacy arises when someone claims that allowing one action or decision will set off an unstoppable series of consequences, even though no logical or causal connection is established. Identifying the slippery slope fallacy is important because it helps prevent the escalation of fear or concern based on unsupported assumptions. Managing this fallacy encourages a more careful examination of each step in an argument, ensuring that each link in the supposed chain is justified. To address the slippery slope fallacy, challenge the assumptions that the first step will necessarily lead to the extreme consequences predicted. Ask for evidence connecting each step in the supposed causal chain, and evaluate each step independently. Slippery slope. Examples. Arguing that allowing remote work will inevitably lead to the collapse of office culture and team collaboration. Claiming that allowing students to redo assignments will eventually lead to a complete disregard for deadlines. Suggesting that if we ban smoking in public places, it will lead to banning all personal freedoms. Asserting that implementing a small tax will eventually result in the government taking all our income. Believing that if we regulate gun ownership slightly, it will lead to a complete ban on all firearms. Assuming that if one country gains nuclear weapons, every country will follow suit. Arguing that if one aspect of a traditional practice is altered, the entire cultural tradition will be lost. Claiming that if we allow one unauthorized protest, society will descend into lawlessness. Suggesting that if one environmental regulation is loosened, it will lead to the destruction of all protected lands. Believing that accepting one scientific theory as fact will lead to the dismissal of all religious beliefs. What is the false cause fallacy? The false cause fallacy occurs when someone assumes that because two events occur together, one causes the other, without sufficient evidence to establish a causal relationship. This fallacy arises when correlation is mistaken for causation, leading to the erroneous conclusion that one event must have caused the other simply because they are associated. Identifying the false cause fallacy is important because it prevents misleading conclusions based on coincidence rather than evidence. Managing this fallacy encourages a more critical examination of the relationship between events, ensuring that causality is properly established. To address the false cause fallacy, ask for evidence that directly links the events in question. Consider other possible explanations for the correlation and evaluate whether a genuine causal relationship exists. The false cause fallacy is broader than the post hoc fallacy. While both involve mistaken causation, the post hoc fallacy specifically involves assuming that because one event followed another, the first event caused the second. The false cause fallacy, on the other hand, includes any erroneous attribution of causation, not just those based on temporal sequence. False cause. Examples. Assuming that because ice cream sales increase in summer and so do crime rates, ice cream consumption causes crime. Believing that because students who participate in extracurricular activities have higher grades, extracurricular activities cause better academic performance. Concluding that because a person recovered after taking a certain medication, the medication caused the recovery, without considering other factors. Suggesting that because economic recessions often follow presidential elections, elections cause recessions. Arguing that because countries with higher chocolate consumption have more Nobel Prize winners, chocolate causes intellectual achievement. Believing that wearing a Lucky Charm caused a sports team to win a game. Concluding that because people who eat breakfast tend to weigh less, breakfast consumption causes weight loss. Arguing that because a drop in piracy has coincided with global warming, the reduction in piracy caused climate change. Assuming that because two celebrities dated and both experienced career success, their relationship caused their success. Suggesting that because a company's profits increased after it hired a new CEO, the CEO's leadership was the sole cause of the increase. What is the bandwagon fallacy? The bandwagon fallacy occurs when someone argues that a belief or action is correct simply because it is popular or widely held. This fallacy arises when the popularity of an idea or action is used as the primary reason for accepting it as true or appropriate, rather than examining the evidence or reasoning behind it. Identifying the bandwagon fallacy is crucial for resisting peer pressure and making decisions based on evidence rather than popular opinion. Managing this fallacy promotes independent thinking and a focus on the merits of an argument rather than its popularity. To address the bandwagon fallacy, critically evaluate the reasons behind a popular belief or action. Encourage discussions that focus on evidence and logical reasoning, rather than simply following what the majority believes. Bandwagon fallacy. Examples. Believing that a diet must be effective because everyone is trying it. Arguing that a movie is good because it is a box office hit. Assuming that a political candidate is the best choice because they are leading in the polls. Believing that a fashion trend is stylish because many people are wearing it. Arguing that a product is superior because it is the best-selling item in its category. Concluding that a belief must be true because it has been widely accepted for a long time. Assuming that a social media platform is the best because it has the most users. Believing that a behavior is morally acceptable because it is common in society. Arguing that a technology is the best option because it is the most popular. Assuming that a health supplement is effective because many people are using it. What is the begging the question fallacy? The begging the question fallacy occurs when an argument's premise assumes the truth of the conclusion instead of supporting it, effectively using the conclusion as a premise. This fallacy arises when the argument takes for granted what it is supposed to prove, often resulting in circular reasoning where the conclusion is simply restated as a premise. Identifying the begging the question fallacy is important because it exposes arguments that lack proper evidence or reasoning. Managing this fallacy encourages a deeper examination of the premises used in an argument and ensures that conclusions are supported by independent evidence. To address the begging the question fallacy, challenge the argument to provide independent support for its conclusion. Ensure that the premises are not simply restatements of the conclusion and that they can stand on their own. Begging the question fallacy. Examples. Freedom of speech is important because people should be able to speak freely. The Bible is true because it says so in the Bible. The death penalty is wrong because killing people is immoral. We must trust the government because the government knows what is best for us. This candidate is the best for the job because they are the most qualified. This product is the best because it's superior to all others. We should not allow students to cheat because cheating is wrong. This law must be followed because it is the law. Democracy is the best form of government because all other systems are inferior. People who are well-educated should go to college because higher education is for the well-educated. What is the Quoque fallacy? The Quoque fallacy occurs when someone tries to discredit an argument by pointing out that the opponent does not act consistently with the argument's conclusion, effectively shifting the focus away from the argument itself. This fallacy arises when a person attempts to dismiss criticism by accusing the critic of hypocrisy, rather than addressing the substance of the criticism. Identifying the Quoque fallacy is crucial for keeping discussions focused on the actual argument, rather than allowing the conversation to be derailed by accusations of inconsistency. Managing this fallacy helps maintain productive dialogue by encouraging participants to address the issues at hand. To address the Quoque fallacy, refocus the discussion on the validity of the argument itself, regardless of the personal behavior of the person presenting it. Emphasize that an argument's merit does not depend on the actions of the person making it. Quoque. Examples. Dismissing a smoker's argument against smoking by pointing out that they smoke. Rejecting an environmentalist's plea to reduce carbon emissions because they drive a car. Ignoring advice on healthy eating from a doctor because they are overweight. Refusing to consider a teacher's criticism of cheating because they admitted to cheating in college. Rejecting a politician's stance on tax reform because they have been accused of tax evasion. Dismissing a friend's advice on punctuality because they are often late. Ignoring a coworker's suggestion to work harder because they take frequent breaks. Refusing to take relationship advice from a divorced person. Rejecting a parent's concerns about social media use because they spend a lot of time online. Dismissing a financial advisor's tips on saving money because they recently filed for bankruptcy. What is the no true Scotsman fallacy? The no true Scotsman fallacy occurs when someone modifies the definition of a group or category to exclude a counterexample, thereby making the argument unfalsifiable. This fallacy arises when a person dismisses counterexamples to a general claim by asserting that those examples do not belong to the group being discussed, without valid justification. Identifying the no true Scotsman fallacy is important because it prevents arguments from becoming immune to criticism by shifting definitions. Managing this fallacy encourages a consistent and fair application of definitions in arguments. To address the no true Scotsman fallacy, challenge the shifting of definitions and insist on clear and consistent criteria for inclusion in the group or category being discussed. No true Scotsman. Examples. No true Scotsman puts sugar in his porridge. No true Christian would ever doubt the existence of God. No true patriot would criticize their country. No true vegan would wear leather. No true artist would sell their work for commercial purposes. No true scientist would ever question climate change. No true feminist would ever support traditional gender roles. No true gamer would play mobile games. No true environmentalist would drive a car. No true friend would ever cancel plans. What is the appeal to emotion fallacy? The appeal to emotion fallacy occurs when someone manipulates an emotional response in place of a valid or compelling argument, relying on feelings rather than logic or evidence to persuade. This fallacy arises when an argument is based primarily on eliciting an emotional reaction rather than presenting factual evidence or logical reasoning to support the conclusion. Identifying the appeal to emotion fallacy is crucial for ensuring that decisions and beliefs are based on reason and evidence, not merely on emotional manipulation. Managing this fallacy helps maintain a rational approach to problem-solving and decision-making. To address the appeal to emotion fallacy, focus on the evidence and logic behind the argument, and avoid being swayed solely by emotional appeals. Encourage discussions that prioritize facts and reason over emotional rhetoric. Appeal to emotion. Examples. Arguing that a charity should be supported because children are suffering, without discussing how the charity will help. Suggesting that a political candidate should be elected because they have a heartwarming personal story, rather than focusing on their policies. Urging people to adopt a certain policy by showing graphic images, without explaining the policy's benefits. Arguing that a criminal should be convicted based on the emotional pain of the victims, rather than the evidence presented in court. Encouraging support for a war by appealing to patriotism, rather than discussing the strategic reasons for the conflict. Suggesting that a product is superior because it has a nostalgic appeal, without providing details on its quality. Arguing against euthanasia by focusing on the emotional distress of the family, without considering the patient's wishes. Promoting a movie based solely on how it made people feel, rather than discussing its artistic or technical merits. Urging people to avoid certain foods by appealing to fear of disease, without scientific backing. Arguing that an environmental policy should be adopted because it feels like the right thing to do, without discussing its actual impact. What is the middle ground fallacy? The middle ground fallacy occurs when someone argues that the middle position between two extremes must be correct simply because it is the middle position, without considering the evidence for each side. This fallacy arises when a compromise or middle position is assumed to be the best or most accurate solution, even if the extremes have not been properly evaluated or justified. Identifying the middle ground fallacy is important because it prevents the assumption that compromise is always correct or reasonable. Managing this fallacy encourages a thorough evaluation of all sides of an argument, ensuring that the best supported position is chosen, not just the one in the middle. To address the middle ground fallacy, evaluate each position on its own merits, rather than assuming the middle point is automatically the best. Consider the evidence supporting each side and be open to the possibility that one extreme may be more justified than the middle ground. Middle ground. Examples. Arguing that a moderate level of censorship is best because it falls between complete freedom of speech and total censorship. Suggesting that partially cutting taxes is the best policy because it's between raising and eliminating taxes. Believing that a diet consisting of both healthy and unhealthy foods is best because it balances extremes. Arguing that moderate gun control is the best approach because it's between a ban and no regulation. Assuming that a political compromise is best simply because it's between two opposing views. Suggesting that splitting the difference on a pay raise is fair, regardless of the merits of the proposed amounts. Believing that taking half the recommended dose of a medication is best because it balances taking the full dose and not taking it at all. Arguing that a compromise in a legal dispute is best simply because it is a middle ground between the two parties' original demands. Assuming that a judicial decision is fair because it represents a middle ground between opposing legal interpretations. Believing that a compromise between scientific consensus and pseudoscience must be the most reasonable position. What is the composition fallacy? The composition fallacy occurs when someone assumes that what is true for a part must also be true for the whole, leading to incorrect conclusions about the collective based on individual components. This fallacy arises when the characteristics of a part are improperly attributed to the entire group or structure, leading to generalizations that do not hold for the whole. Identifying the composition fallacy is important because it prevents incorrect generalizations that can lead to flawed conclusions. Managing this fallacy encourages careful consideration of how individual parts relate to the whole and whether those parts' attributes genuinely apply to the entire group or structure. To address the composition fallacy, evaluate whether the attributes of the parts logically and necessarily apply to the whole. Consider whether there are factors at the collective level that might alter the characteristics of the parts when combined. Composition fallacy. Examples. Assuming that because each member of a team is talented, the team as a whole will be unbeatable. Believing that because each brick in a building is light, the building must be light. Assuming that because all the ingredients in a recipe are delicious individually, the dish will be delicious. Believing that because each individual in a group is well behaved, the group will behave well in all situations. Believing that because each individual department in a company is performing well, the overall company is highly successful. Assuming that because all the components of a machine are high quality, the machine as a whole will be high quality. Believing that because each chapter of a book is well written, the book as a whole must be well written. Assuming that because each investment in a portfolio is low risk, the entire portfolio is low risk. Arguing that because each section of an essay is well argued, the essay as a whole is well argued. Believing that because each part of a puzzle is easy to solve, the entire puzzle is easy to solve. What is the division fallacy? The division fallacy is the opposite of the composition fallacy and occurs when someone assumes that what is true for the whole must also be true for its parts. This fallacy arises when the characteristics of a whole are incorrectly attributed to its individual components, leading to erroneous conclusions about the parts based on the attributes of the entire group or structure. Identifying the division fallacy is important because it prevents incorrect assumptions about individual parts based on the whole. Managing this fallacy encourages a careful examination of how the characteristics of the whole may or may not apply to its components. To address the division fallacy, evaluate whether the attributes of the whole logically and necessarily apply to the individual parts. Consider whether there are differences at the part level that might alter the characteristics when taken in isolation. Division fallacy. Examples. Assuming that because a company is wealthy, all its employees must be wealthy. Believing that because a car is expensive, all its parts must be expensive. Assuming that because a country is democratic, all its citizens are democratically minded. Believing that because a cake is sweet, each ingredient in the cake is sweet. Assuming that because a book is long, each chapter must be long. Assuming that because a machine is efficient, each component of the machine must be efficient. Believing that because a family is well off, each family member must be financially comfortable. Assuming that because a movie is critically acclaimed, every scene in the movie must be outstanding. Believing that because a government is corrupt, each official in the government must be corrupt.